Welcome to the White Collar Fitness Radio, the ultimate podcast for professionals striving to achieve optimal performance in today's fast-paced age. I'm your host, Bruno Dalladoni, and I'm here to help you achieve optimal performance even if you're short on time. Welcome back to the White Collar Fitness Radio. It's been a couple of weeks since we had an episode out, and there's lots of reasons for that. But we're back, and we're back with a vengeance. Today, we're discussing maximum results in the shortest amount of time. Obviously, something that we all want, and especially if you're busy, you've got a lot of work going on, there's life happening, you want to get some results, but you don't want to waste your time. That's what we're discussing today. And I think the first thing for us to really pay attention to from the start is the idea that if you're really trying to maximize your results, you have to know what those results are in service of. And what do I mean by that? If you're trying to maximize your time, if you're in business or if you have kids, if you're trying to maximize your time, it has to be almost targeted. It has to be focused. So the same applies naturally when we're talking about maximizing your time in the gym, maximizing your time when you're training. And for you to make that progress, for you to make those strides forward, you have to know if you're progressing by tracking where you are. So benchmarking where you're starting from. That's obviously first and foremost. You have to have a goal in mind. So what are you trying to do? And benchmark where you are. Benchmark yourself regularly so you can test, implement, and see, in fact, the progression. Now, why am I obsessing about it being focused and goal-oriented and all of these things? The long and short answer is quite simple, which is if your goal is to run a marathon and you're trying to maximize your time to be better at running, that's a different goal. The way you train and the way you maximize your time for efficiency is obviously different to if you're trying to gain the best shape of your life, if you're trying to compete in a strongman competition, whatever the arena is. If you're just trying to genuinely be healthy, all these are different and you need a different approach for all of them. Naturally, my specialty where I sit in is getting people into the best shape of their life, best shape they can be. Just getting Jane from accounts, Bob from sales, people that don't necessarily see the potential that they could have in terms of their physique, in terms of their performance, and maximizing that. So to that end, I'll be obviously focusing a little bit more on weight training for today's discussion, but that is in the service of, that's really what I do. I'm not a running coach. I'm not a strong man. I don't do powerlifting. To that end, we'll discuss getting in good shape. There's a lot of things you can find on the internet. I would put them in the category of modifiers, and I'll explain that in a second. But there's a lot of those things that you can find on the internet. A quick Google search and you find programs that have things like drop sets or rest pauses or cluster sets or forced reps, all manners of different, like I say, what I would call modifiers into those sets, into that program to maximize your time. Now, there is a place for them, but before adding those modifiers, you have to be hitting the basics really well. Be a master at the basics. Because if you're not, it doesn't matter what you add to save yourself some time. You're not going to be hitting the right muscle groups. You're not going to be doing the right stuff. And that consequently will mean worse results, especially if you're trying to save yourself some time. So be a master at those basics. Make sure your form is on point. You're targeting the correct muscle group for the exercise. There's obviously different ways of doing that, mind-muscle connection being the primary. And a good way to achieve that mind-muscle connection is, in fact, have a conscious feel of the working muscle. It gets all a bit woo-woo, I know, bear with me, but the idea is like this. If you're moving, if you're, let's say, doing a bench press, don't think about the reps. Don't think about going from A to B. Think about feeling your pec muscles engage as you move through that exercise, through that rep, through the exercise. Every single time, every single rep, I want you consciously feeling the muscle move. And although that sounds a bit weird, there is, in fact, some evidence to suggest that mind-muscle connection is really beneficial to muscle development. Of course, you can take that too far, but having worked with hundreds of people at this point, I would suggest most people need to focus on that a little bit more than what they do already, because most people don't focus on it at all. Have conscious tension in the target muscle. It's number one. Number two is, and it goes with that, is having control. I've mentioned control. We did an episode on tempo before, and it's just that. So it's having time under tension, and you do that by slowing things down and feeling the muscle, right? If you're just blasting through your reps, you're not going to be, you might feel it, but it makes it harder for you to feel it, especially if you're not used to consciously engaging those muscles. So slow it down, make sure you've got conscious tension, and having that conscious tension, having that slightly higher awareness of your muscle, of the target muscle, will open up another avenue here, which is also part of these basics, which is working within your active range of motion, which is one of those things that most people just don't do. They don't even understand what an active or passive range of motion is. Suppose we're on video. The easiest way for you to think about it is like this. If I get my arm, I can bend it this far. This is now my active range of motion. Now, sorry, the light. This is now my active range of motion. But if I get a weight on my other hand, I can push even further. Can you see that? Sorry, I'm just watching the video as I do it. Hopefully you can see that I can push it further. That's passive. I can't control that. So the reason for being within your active range of motion is that you can control, and the, let's call them auxiliary muscles, that are also working, that aren't the primary mover of the movement. Big words, but think about it. Your shoulder, for example, has lots of little muscles around. You've got your rotator cuff. You've got all sorts of other bits that are deeper and smaller to help manage the joint and stabilize the joint. But if you're going past the range, you can in fact control those muscles into a more passive range. You start putting your body in positions it doesn't particularly want to be in for you to stimulate the muscle you're trying to work as much as possible. Hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully you know where I'm going with this. So the basics we need to really focus on, and like I say, be a master at the basics, is your form, your active range of motion, conscious tension, and control, time under tension. Active tension and control under tension. Conscious tension, and time under tension. Hopefully you can see how those would in fact benefit. Now, like I said, there are modifiers we can play with, and once you've mastered those, once you're really good, feeling where your own range of motion is, not being pushed around, I'm pretty sure I've said this before at some point, when you can control the muscle, when you can control the weight, as opposed to letting the weight control you, almost irrespective of the speed you're moving, now we can start looking at some modifiers. And You've got lots of them. Like I said, you've got drop sets where you'd have a set weight. Normally drop sets tend to be a little bit easier if you're using machines because you can do your set. So again, using the chest example, you're sat on a seated chest press. You do your set. You finish when you're spent. You take that pin, you move it down 1 or 2 plates, and then you carry on. So all you've done is you've reduced the amount of load you're moving and you're carrying on, pushing that muscle deeper and deeper into fatigue. And if it's done properly and if it's done well, you can add more volume to your training and save yourself some time, but it has to be done cleverly. You've got things like rest pauses, which similar type of concept, obviously slightly different, where you do your set, you're spent, you pause for 10 to 15 seconds, and then you push a few more reps out. So it's just about enough rest for you to have a quick shakeout, get your mind back in the game, and then just drive through for another few reps. Again, pushing fatigue a little bit more into the muscle, driving that tissue a little bit closer to failure. You've got things like cluster sets, which are usually 5 sets of 5 reps with 5 seconds rest. So it's literally just smashing it out quickly. And again, you're sort of really adding volume, adding fatigue into that tissue. And then another one that I'm going to mention, because you tend to see that quite often on the internet, forced reps. Now, forced reps are fine if you do them well and they're programmed into your plan effectively. Because what forced reps do is they take you past failure, again, if it's done properly. And the problem with that is that even reaching failure, the level of systemic fatigue, so your central nervous system, just your body, the amount of fatigue it feels and it takes on is so much that it becomes very difficult for you to recover quickly. And obviously, recovery is the next point. We'll come back to it. But recovery has got to be paramount if you're trying to get maximum results in the shortest amount of time. I wouldn't necessarily stay away from forced reps, but I'd make sure that you only program it once across your mesocycle in your overload week. So the week you're really pushing and you're going balls to the wall. If you're going to tack on some forced reps, I do it then, but that's it. Ready for your deload the week after so that your body can really recover, because you will take, if you're training hard, and I hope this goes without saying, if you're not training hard, everything we've spoken about so far is pointless, because if you're not training hard enough, stimulating the tissue enough, therefore you're not going to be getting the results you want. So assuming you are in fact training hard enough, the amount of fatigue that you accrue is quite high. So your body's going to feel quite beat up. And that naturally then takes me to fatigue management, which, like I said, if you're training hard, you need to recover. And that goes back to volume management. And volume management is obviously where we can add or save time by managing if you're doing straight sets or if you're doing some of these modified sets, but you have to manage that fatigue. Now, points that at this point should hopefully go without saying, but points for your fatigue management: good sleep, good nutrition, less alcohol. Good sleep, obviously, goes without saying. If you don't sleep well, you're not recovering because you're not repairing quite as much as you need to. That's number one. Also, you end up more fatigued, but you end up slower in the brain. Your membrane starts failing because it's just tired. Like you haven't recovered, you haven't slept enough. Goes without saying. But as your body also takes a toll from not sleeping after a while. So less alcohol has in fact been shown to impair recovery Many ways it does that. One of them, as we know, impairs your sleep. Just make sure, guys. Also, alcohol has been shown to inhibit anabolism. And that's a big fancy word to basically say if you're trying to get in good shape and put on a little bit of muscle tissue, and that is whether you're trying to get absolutely jacked or whether you're just trying to create a bit of definition on your body, alcohol will in fact impair that. Make sure, guys, that if you're trying to manage your fatigue as much as possible, you just take those bits into account. I'm not saying don't drink. I'm just saying have it in your mind that your short-term pleasure of having a cheeky drink might offset your long-term goal of being in amazing shape and achieving maximum results in that shortest amount of time. Just a few food for thought here. Hopefully that was helpful, guys. As always, like, share, subscribe, send it to your friends, and find me on Instagram at Bruno Dalladoni. Guys, and I'll catch you next time.